A few weeks ago, I went on a trip to Portugal accompanied by my good friends Austin and Faisal. And if you saw my most recent video, you'd know that we spent some time in Porto, but most of our time in Portugal was actually spent in Lisbon. I was able to go to Madeira last year, and I also had a few hours to explore Porto during a short layover, but I had never been to Lisbon, so I was really excited to go to a city that I've heard so many good things about. And in this video, what I wanted to do was show you what our days look like, give you some of my impressions of the city and what it was like to photograph it, kind of show you the places that we went, and overall just kind of share my experience after having a bit of time to process it. So Austin and I took the same overnight flight out of Newark, and Faisal was on a different flight out of New York City, but we ended up landing in Lisbon around the same time, so we met up in the Starbucks at the airport, and then we ended up taking an Uber to our Airbnb around 1 in the afternoon.
You didn't bring a camera?
Once we got there around 1:30, we were all pretty stoked to be there, and even though I was running on like less than an hour of sleep, we decided to just kind of grab our gear and went right out the door to shoot.
Hello?
I was kind of running on fumes, so that first day for me was more so just about getting a feel for the city and the people, and I wasn't really too focused on getting a ton of photos. Before the trip, I was actually seeing a lot of anti-tourist news in countries like Spain and Italy, and I was kind of wondering if Lisbon might be the same way. And while we did experience a few off-putting interactions, I think everything for the most part went pretty swimmingly. I was trying extra hard to be kind of mindful and respectful of the locals, so if there was a photo that just didn't feel right to take, I didn't even bother picking up my camera. Now with that said, I did start to get a little bit more comfortable after like 3 or 4 days there. In the beginning, I was a little bit more focused on the architecture because that is like the biggest visual difference in comparison to New York, and I wasn't exactly too comfortable getting up close to people to take photos, so a lot of the photos from the earlier days were kind of more in the abstract or architectural direction. On the first day, we didn't have much of a plan, so we ended up just roaming around aimlessly. The next morning, Austin went to reshoot a spot that he saw the day prior, but he wanted to get it in the morning light, so me and Faisal went out a little bit after him, and we ended up meeting up when he was done. One of the reasons we decided to come to Lisbon in September specifically was because Faisal was in Lisbon at the same time 2 years ago, and he was raving about how good light was at that time of year, and he was not wrong. I'm not really sure what it looks like at other times of the year, but the way the light just hit the streets is so beautiful, and the weather is extremely pleasant. So if you are planning to come to Lisbon, September is a great month for it, but just keep in mind that it does get a little bit busy.
Right in the morning, like right now.
Cheers. I mean,
On the rocks. Coffee on the rocks.
We had a tentative plan to visit a castle, but we wanted to do that a little bit later in the afternoon, so up until that point, we just kind of wandered around aimlessly. Once the time came, we almost decided on not going to the castle once we kind of saw how long the line was, but it moved pretty quickly, and I am glad that we did go because the views of Lisbon were really good, and I was also able to get a few shots from the castle grounds that I really like. After we left, we made our way down to the river where we hung out for a bit, and then we finished off the day shooting golden hour right around the corner from our Airbnb because the light was hitting so nice, and we ended up coming back to that spot a few times throughout the trip. Day 3 was a fucking long one, but it started with a sunrise mission to a pretty popular photo spot where the trams kind of come up and down the road around this curve. And so we just kind of hung out there and watched the sun come up over the city skyline. Once the sun came up and the light started filling the streets, we made our way over to Moraria. I'm sorry if I butchered that pronunciation, but it is a multicultural neighborhood in Lisbon, and it was one of my favorite areas to photograph. I found myself shooting a lot at longer focal lengths throughout the trip, mainly at like 50mm and up, and this was probably partially because I was a little bit too scared to get closer to people, fearing how they might react. But at the same time, I do kind of think that the city lends itself better to that compressed look of a longer focal length, mainly because of all the narrow streets and textures, but at the same time, that's just my opinion. After a really good morning session, we went back to the Airbnb to just kind of rest for a little bit, and for the second half of the day, I brought out my film camera because I was shooting 2 rolls of Silbersalt's 35mm motion picture film, specifically 50D and 250D, but my next video will be entirely about that process, so if you want to see that, then consider subscribing so you don't miss it. For the second half of the day, we plan to go to a museum called Mat, which is on the water, but it's a bit of a hike away, so we slowly made our way in that direction, and we first shot the neighborhoods of São Bento and Estrela.
How many miles?
spending some time there, we got an Uber that took us to Matt, and we shot there for a little bit and also walked over to the marina under the bridge. I love being around and photographing scenes by bodies of water, whether that's like being on a ferry or on a beach or in a lake by the mountains. And I don't know why, but I think that's why Lisbon and Porto feel so special to me, just because they're both right on the water, so they satisfy that craving, but they're also cities that are dense and full of life, so you just get the best of both worlds. Once our time in that area was over, we got an Uber back to our Airbnb, and we basically got there just as the golden light was flooding the street that we got dropped off on. The day wasn't over because we actually went out to shoot once it got dark out. Now, in my opinion, Lisbon is not a night photography city. A lot of the streets kind of look very similar at night, and that could probably be said for other cities around the world. But yeah, just like the warm orange streetlights just kind of take over the photo, and if that's your thing, then you would love it, but I truly think this city shines the best during the day. No pun intended. All right, day 4 in Lisbon. I didn't vlog at all for the first 3 days, just trying to get my sleep right. Our energy levels were kind of all over the place, but it's day 4. It's pretty windy right now, so I hope you can hear me, but we're on top of this like viewing platform. It's next to a cathedral, and we're just kind of shooting down. Let me show you. Kind of like shooting down onto the street right there. Yeah, a lot of good views around here. We were planning on doing a little bit of a day trip today, but it is kind of windy, and the place we wanted to go to was more of like a little beach town. So we decided to just stay in Lisbon. We're gonna do that day trip tomorrow, I think, and today we're just gonna kind of explore a part of the city that we got a little bit of walking around in on the other day, but we're gonna try to kind of do more of that today, and we'll see how it goes. All right, so we're in Almada. Energy is kind of dwindling, and it's only like, it's 3:43 p.m., but we're gonna see if we can shoot around here. I haven't really been taking a ton of photos, not because I don't see anything, but it's a mix of not seeing things plus being too tired to actually compose a photo. But yeah, we're gonna shoot around here for a bit and see where our feet take us. Like I said, my energy was kind of dwindling on this day, so it wasn't really a heavy photo day for me, but it was nice to just kind of people watch. We did stumble upon these skaters who were hanging out at this little viewpoint, and they were just kind of like riding and doing tricks, so we got a few photos there, but then we ended up making our way back to the Airbnb. On day 5, we decided to do a little day trip out to a beach town called Cascais. I think that's how you pronounce it. Again, I'm sorry if I butchered the pronunciation, but it's about a 40-minute drive away. And so once we got dropped off there, we went straight to the beach and started shooting there. The rest of our time in Cascais, we spent on these rocks by the water where people were swimming and relaxing, and we even got to photograph some of the cliff jumpers that were jumping off the bridge into the water, so that was really fun. Is he alright?
Dude, he just fell over.
Backwards?
Yeah.
This was our last day in Lisbon before we went to Porto, and it started in the morning in the Príncipe Real area. One of the things that I did want to do before we left was take a ferry or a boat ride, and so we decided to take a ferry from Lisbon across the river to Almada. And even though I wasn't able to get photos on the ferry that I would have liked, once we got dropped off in Almada, we were greeted with some really cool views, and so we decided to explore that area a little bit more, and it ended up being one of my favorite parts of the trip. The next morning we took a train from Lisbon to Porto, where we spent the next 3 days, but then we ended up coming back to Lisbon to finish off the trip. The day we got back to Lisbon was a really chill day. We just kind of wanted to relax for the last couple days before we all went back home. While we were hanging out by the water, we actually noticed a wildfire that was burning across the river in the distance, and even though that's something you never really want to see, I think I was able to get a few interesting shots from that. Aside from that, we really didn't do much else. Austin flew home the next morning, and me and Faisal had an extra day, so we just shot some B-roll after Austin left, and then we flew home the next day. This was the first international trip that I took with other photographers, and those photographers just happened to be really good friends of mine, so it was a really good time. In the first few days, I was definitely struggling a little bit to overcome that anxiety of taking photos in a city that's kind of suffered a bit from over-tourism, but after the first 3 or 4 days, I was able to settle in a bit more, which also made photographing Porto that much easier. Lisbon itself is a pretty physically demanding city. We walked probably an average of like 20,000 steps per day, but most of those steps were up and down the very steep streets, so it felt like a lot more, and we were constantly in the sun and didn't get a single overcast or rainy day, which was nice, but I wouldn't have minded maybe one cloudy or rainy day just to see it in some different conditions. Lisbon is an absolutely beautiful city with tons of character, and it was such a nice change of pace from New York. If you're planning a street photography trip to Lisbon, I'd recommend staying anywhere between 7 to 10 days if you build a few rest days in that time span. Some of my favorite areas that we went to included Alfama, Muraria, when we took a ferry over to Almada to shoot the golden hour there, and Príncipe Real also had really good colors and reflections. Overall, Lisbon is a really fun city for street photography. Also, like, the food and the views are just immaculate, so it probably won't be my last time there. All of my photos from this trip and basically for the last couple of months have been edited using my presets, which are coming out in November. So if you're interested in those, I'm going to be posting some updates over on Instagram, so make sure you're following me over there to kind of stay in the loop. If you made it this far into the video, which I assume is pretty long at this point, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to check out the videos that Austin and Faisal are also making from this trip. So that's all I have. Subscribe for more videos, give it a like if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.